The Jefferson Curl can come in a variety of flavors, but they all essentially do the same thing. Let's start with just the basics of form and then talk about the implements. First thing I want to do is think of a bad back position. So if I'm going to deadlift, I'm going to have this really great tight back position, or if I'm doing an RDL or a squat, basically the goal is rigidity. Here I'm losing that to basically get all the spaces in between my vertebrae, lengthen out kind of the lower hips down to the hamstrings, and then get a bit of thoracic grounding as well. So I like to think of initiating that from a chin tuck. This starts the tension through here, as opposed to if I were to just kind of fold over and miss a bit of that along the way. Tuck my chin, try and point my nose to my chest, try and point it to my belly button, rounding, rounding, rounding. Nice and slow to the base, exhale, and come back up. Now, a couple of things about this. Your back might be sensitive to the degree, this is something I want you to think about and be mindful of, is if you get to here and you go, oh, I feel some sensations in the low back, that's where you stop. Totally fine. I've had people start this high and slowly work themselves all the way down to a slant board to weights, because sometimes those little guys in between there just aren't set up to handle a bit of that bending through the back, okay? As far as like, what do I want you to look like as you're going through this? You can think of basically like 80% of this is actually coming from the hips in the end. So you can see my glutes, my hamstrings are very open to basically accommodate most of that downward force. From there, my T-spine gets quite a bit of the remaining, and then my lumbar spine gets that like last 10%. And so the mistake would be to think that this is all about rounding my back as much as possible. No, it's almost like I'm imagining my body as a bow, and I'm bowing it, and I'm gonna have some natural disposition of a little bit here, a little bit more there, and mostly through there. So I'm a fairly open person, and what I find as I go through these is that I get to the bottom and I feel most of the sensation through here and down to my hamstrings and calves, and almost nothing through my low back. You can see my low back really isn't moving all that much compared to me just standing up tall. So the goal isn't necessarily to bend your low back, okay? That out of the way, let's talk about our different standards. I can go on the ground, totally fine, totally productive. This basically pulls all the slack out of your calves, and so some people find it even difficult to stand here. That implies that you have very tight calves, and this is going to help facilitate you getting more open there. I try and stand up nice and tall. This pushes the most amount of tension into my calves. Tuck my chin, roll down, roll down, roll down. And the cool thing about the slant board is it actually gives you a perfect end range target to work with. So this is a cool milestone. It's like, ah, yeah, cool. I'm touching the corner here. But truly, I want to get it so that my wrists are past that edge. And typically, it's going to associate with your fingers touching the ground, okay? This is now a very global stretch through the whole system. And you might find even disproportionately gets a little less into your low back because there's so much tension being pulled from this bottom section. Adding weight, pretty simple. I've got very light weights here. You might decide to go lighter than this. These are 8 pounds. Nothing really changes. I allow those weights to track out in front of me. This can be done on flat ground. That's totally fine if you don't have a slant board. But the whole goal is incremental loading of the spine, incremental loading. So I've gotten my spine to, it can handle a very high degree of load. And I started with just a barbell. I did that for like 8 years before I actually started to try and move it forward. So small weights are your best friends. Going slow is highly advantageous to make sure that you don't inadvertently kind of tweak something along the way. Tuck the chin, slow roll down. Most of it comes from the hips, a little bit from the low back, a little bit more from the upper back. Take your time and you're good.